U.S. Vice President JD Vance shocked the world yesterday at the Munich Security Conference when he gave a speech that he thought was going to be, or that everybody there thought was going to be, about the Russia-Ukraine war. Instead, had a bit different focus. And here's just a few of the headlines that have been rolling around. Europe in disarray on Ukraine after Vance's Munich tirade. You have JD Vance attacks Europe over free speech and migration. Trump and Vance are courting Europe's far right to spread their political gospel. And then there's this one here, which Vance brings a wrecking ball to diplomatic gathering in Munich. And then I think my favorite one here is Vance leaves Europe gobsmacked. I didn't even know that was a word that is still used anymore, but holy cow, what in the world did he say that has Europe in such an uproar? Well, to try to answer this, we have the smartest man in London coming to us live from London, Ian Puttock. Ian, what in the world is going on? What is all this uproar started from Vance's speech?
Wow, it's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, I know we're going to discuss this in detail throughout this throughout your show, but obviously the world has gone mad, and we are a US vassal, but the vassal that we are, our leadership, which is the US, has gone through. It's got 360 degrees in the opposite direction, and we haven't caught up. So we're still last week's men, if that makes sense. So. And the propaganda goes deep, and I know we're obviously going to discuss that in detail, but the propaganda runs deep.
You know, that you and I think, and I don't remember if it was on air or in just some of our conversations, have talked about this, that once Trump was elected last November, it was clear that there was going to be a dramatic shift in where the U.S. administration was going. And I think I even asked you, Keir Starmer had been making some comments about a month or so ago. And I said, yeah, but that's something that's really from the Biden era, and that's just not going to work anymore here. And I guess that kind of gets to your point that the U.S. has, changed radically. It may be like a 90-degree shift, but it seems like Europe is still kind of going on like they pretend it's, the same way before. How can that be, though? They obviously pay attention to what happens in Washington. So how could they be shocked at what Vance said here?
Well, how do they begin to undo the propaganda that we've been barraged with for the last few years? I mean, Trump's the evil guy with crazy hair, and he's nuts, he's crazy, he's a Nazi, he's a fascist, he supports the far right. I mean, I'm not saying any of that's true. I'm just saying these are the narratives that we've been fed, and Trump's clearly very different. I'll say that very, very different to Biden and Blinken and all the other people. But he obviously has America's interests at heart, and he's trying to look after America. I mean, that's the whole. He was elected on the mandate of America first. We don't have that in the UK. We don't have that in Europe. We are still very Biden centric, and we've been following a narrative for that many years, and that narrative is supported by the mainstream media. Everything around us supports that narrative, and that narrative is ingrained now into the culture and to the belief systems of the British public. So how do we undo that like that? Because literally, spinning on a plate, we've gone from Biden to Trump, and as you say, it's 180 degrees. It couldn't be more different, and we're still on page 1. Trump's on page 10, and we're not even catching up. We're not catching up.
And I will say many things were expected, and a lot of the stuff that was said and has been said both by Trump and by now JD Vance are things that have been signaling for a long time. And I've just wondered why the other Europeans hadn't been catching up, especially in some of the leaders. But there were some different things, unexpected things that were said during Vance's speech. And let's just jump to that, because as a setup here, everybody, to include me, was looking forward to this speech because we all thought this was going to be the unveiling for the first time of Trump's recommendation for how the Russia-Ukraine war would end. As it turns out, he literally did not touch the subject, but did go down this path.
Many of those who are gathered in Munich would have been hoping that the vice president could shed some light on Donald Trump's plans for a negotiated peace in Ukraine. Instead, they got a lecture about democracy here in Europe.
In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
Okay, I lingered on that because that was supposed to be an applause line, and at first no one applauded, and then that guy in the middle, you see him kind of like look at the screen like, did he just say that? And that's going to come into play here in a minute. Don't forget that scene because I'm going to show you something else that happens later.
So so what's really important? So if you look at any documentaries, videos on social compliance, there was a really famous one. There's a really famous one. I can't remember what it was. It was filmed in the US and outside a university, and some woman screams for help as if she was being molested or accosted or being taken. And there's actors walking around, and there's one person that doesn't know what's happening, and that one person hears the screams, and all the actors just walk around as if they've not heard anything. And if you watch that one person, he or she looks to the others because there's social compliance. That person wants to fit in. So there was a few brave people that looked around and said, I want to do something, which was the right attitude. But the majority just turned the other way and pretended that they hadn't heard it when they had. And if you look in that crowd, they're looking, if someone gives, yeah, great, yeah, well done, and then all of a sudden they look really stupid. There was enough people in that crowd looking around to make sure that they could fit in with what's going on. And that's the problem with all of this, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's the problem with all of this. Social compliance. Not what's right and wrong. Not what's right and wrong. It's fitting in with your pals, your friends, the people that you work with, the people that you have to deal with. All part of a club. And that's how it works.
And in this particular case, I think you also have to overlay that with the fact that they're going, wait, what did he just say? Because that's not, I was looking for something else. And now he's basically, and of course, it got a lot, more uncomfortable for the audience and the European audience as the thing went on, which is what spawned all of those headlines I started off showing here. But I do want to talk about one in particular, because throughout this, he really talked and specified a couple things. One about UK, which you and I talked about online yesterday. Well, I want to touch that second. But he also talked about Germany specifically, and he was implying that the Germans are trying to shut down free speech with some of the parties that they don't happen to like. And in response, it didn't take it long at all for the German Minister of Defense to issue this rebuke.
This democracy was put in question by the Vice President in front of all of Europe. He spoke about the annulment of democracy. And if I understood him correctly, he compared conditions in parts of Europe with those in authoritarian regimes. This is not acceptable.
Okay, now he did get some applause there. But listen, this is what I got to show. And this is where I want you to really start telling us what in the world is going on in Europe. So you had the Minister of Defense saying, you're talking about us like we're an authoritarian regime and shutting down people, and that's inappropriate. This morning, the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, sent this out. As a strong democracy, we are clear. The extreme right should be out of political decision-making process. We reject any idea of working together with extreme right, and it is not for others to give us advice to do so, i.e., we don't like what this political party's saying, so we're going to shut them out. Does that sound democratic, or does it sound authoritarian?
Well, it's not only authoritarian, it's the cancel culture. Cancel as in cancellation. The cancel culture that we've had here that's developed over years. So, if we don't like what you have to say, we cancel you. There's numerous, I say numerous, hundreds and hundreds of people that have been banned from social media because we don't like what they say. And free speech, free speech exists, but it exists within the framework of the law. So, I can pretty say anything I like. within the law. So if I start making threats to harm you, hurt you, kill you, whatever, obviously I'm breaking the law. Can't go, oh, free speech. Free speech has limitations. I mean, there's a very old, very old English expression. Do you have free speech? So if you're in a cinema in the dark and you start shouting out fire, fire, because it's funny, because it's a joke and people get harmed, well, you lose your right to free speech. It wasn't funny because there are limitations on there. But what we do now is if we don't like people, we counsel them, and it's crazy. If people aren't breaking the law, you might hate everything that they say, but as Vance put in there, we respect your right to say it. And as long as it's said politely, respectfully, and most importantly, constructively, even if that person is completely wrong by your own standards, they have a right to say it. But that's diminishing. People are being cancelled. And that's just how it's become over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. It's just crazy, absolutely crazy. Me and you will be banned soon.
Yeah, we've been worried about that from the beginning, but so far we are in good shape. But
we're in better shape now.
True, we are better shape now than we might have been before. Let's look though at the UK part of that, because he also specifically called out the UK for abridging freedom of speech. He cited one particular issue about a guy who was praying near an abortion clinic or something, and you've explained some of that to me. But you also said when we exchanged earlier that there were better examples that would have shown that more appropriately. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, there's I'll send you a link which I'll post on my social media and you can share it. So this is a senior reporter at Rupert Murdoch's The Times. Now the Times newspaper traditionally, not anymore because everything's just changed, but the Times has traditionally been the paper of record. It was trustworthy. They did big investigations into politicians, big business, criminality, things that are in the public interest. They do less of that now, and they're now just generally wishy-washy bits and pieces where they do a bit of great journalism, and then it's just anyway, everything's changed culturally, as you probably know from your own media in the US. But it's a really good video of a very, very senior reporter, or the chief reporter at the Times, explaining how there was a 12-year-old girl in care. She was in a care home. She was being groomed by an Asian, they were an Asian group of men, and they would get her high on drugs and get her drunk and take her out of the care home and put her in a flat, and there'll be a queue of men queuing to rape her. That's however you dress it up, whatever you say, they were paying for sex, they're raping a child. So what happened to that child? And I'll send you the link. You can hear the reporter say this in his own words. The neighbours heard the cries, the screams, and called the police. What did the police do? The police arrested the 12-year-old girl for being a child prostitute. How can a child be a prostitute? It's called rape. It's called rape. It's black and white. In my mind, there's no ambiguity. It's called rape. She was arrested. She was taken to court, and she was convicted in court for public indecency or something like that, because she was, it's insane. Where were the magistrates? Where was the common sense? They're probably mums and dads. Where was their heart for this poor little girl? And the police officers, it's insane. So that's a really good illustration. And by the way, none of the men were convicted. They weren't prosecuted or convicted. The child was. So when we talk about free speech, and the reason the chief reporter explains this, the reason this wasn't reported, and the reason that this whole thing happened, was the police were afraid that because they were Asian grooming gangs, that it would cause issues with the local community and all this kind of stuff. So it was all covered up. So there's a really good example of free speech and all of the other issues, social issues. Look, looking after kids, it doesn't get more important, does it?
Wow.
All of that goes out the window, and we're worried about upsetting the communities and prosecuting a child. It's insane. So that's just one example off the top of my head. I'll send you the link. It's harrowing. It's harrowing listening, and it's coming from a very credible source. It's not coming from somebody on the internet heard this five times over. The person that was at the heart of the story and wasn't allowed to report it.
Wow, that's that's very disturbing on its
Very
own right,
disturbing. Of course.
even outside of the context of here.
Of course.
But we're going to stick in Britain here for a minute because it wasn't just JD Vance's speech that has a lot of people in an uproar, but also his boss, the quote new sheriff that's in town. And here on the floor of the British Parliament, MP Davey said he was really upset about some things that Trump was doing.
If Ukraine is forced to surrender its own sovereign territory to Russia, it will be the greatest betrayal of a European ally since Poland in 1945. But President Trump says Ukraine may end up Russian, and he wants American money back. I think we all fear where this could end and the dangerous implications for our defence and our security. So can the Prime Minister reassure this House that he and other European leaders have given sufficient support to President Zelensky so that he can't be bullied by Trump and Putin into accepting a deal that will effectively hand victory to Russia?
Prime Minister.
Okay, so we're going to break that down here. He said a bunch of stuff there, and I want to get the different pieces for you because I think this speaks to what you said at the opening of this, that there is like a 180-degree difference between where the UK has been and these guys still are and where Trump is. And I think that is very much highlighted by how Trump is approaching the Russia-Ukraine war and how he's trying to bring it to an end. And specific things about this. For example, he said if Ukraine is, quote, made to surrender by Trump, look, there won't be anything by Trump. This is what the reality is on the battlefield. And I just got to ask you, Ian, do these guys not actually know what has happened over the last 3 years physically on the battlefield?
No. So so I'm going to really contradict myself. So allow me to finish. So,
okay.
So from his perspective, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. And I'll explain why that is. We have been barraged, as I said in our introduction, we've been barraged for the last 3 to 5 years pre-war that Russia is the great evil, Putin's like the new Hitler and all this kind of stuff. We've had propaganda for so long. We then have the war, and as we are all instructed by the BBC and all of the mainstream media here in the UK, this is a completely unprovoked attack. Putin woke up one morning, had nothing better to do, and invaded Ukraine. So if you look at it from that perspective, he is the evil tyrant Hitler and all the things that we call him here in the UK. But the real narrative of what's happened, the CIA coup in 2014, peaceful activists being burnt alive in the trade union house, all of this kind of stuff, no one knows that. In fact, when you say it, you're called repeating, you're accused of repeating Russian propaganda because people don't know. It's all about information control. So from his perspective, to go back to what your question was, he's either a liar or he's stupid or he's both. And I would suggest that he probably doesn't know a lot of, he doesn't know the history.
So then that begs the question, why is the British media given that view? Because that's not just by happenstance. It's got to be part of a plan. Why would they want to put forward inaccurate information that would lead to false assumptions that could genuinely harm British national security?
Yeah, I mean, they do. I mean, we're US vassals. I mean, it's just as simple as that. We're US vassals. So, up until a month ago, we were in fine tune with the I blame you and I know you personally, I'm joking. But,
fair enough.
But up until a month ago, the British narrative was fine tuned with the US narrative in terms of the direction of this war, the cause of this war. And the reality is, Trump's come in and he's aware of what's happened. And we're still in that time warp. So that's why, I'll give you a really good example about the media. So I won't mention his name, but deputy editor. So one of the biggest selling tabloids, gone now. One of the biggest selling tabloids, which was called News of the World, under Rupert Murdoch, and there was a big scandal 10 plus years ago, all about phone hacking. So they had to close the paper because of all the scandals associated with that. But I was in the deputy editor's house having a cup of tea with him, and we were talking about stuff. And I talked about, so this was about 2015, 2016. And I said to him about the chemical attack when Assad, so it might have been a bit later, it might be 17, 18, about the chemical attack when Assad was accused of killing all these people with poisonous gases, chemical weapons. And he said, yeah, absolutely. And we did a big piece on that. And because he's working in the trade, obviously, at a different newspaper now, they all went to town on that. And I said to him, but there is a counter narrative, and it's quite an important one, and that is what do they call it? Oh, the Chemical Weapons Organization,
OPCW, I think.
OPCW. That the actual inspectors on the ground, I think up to about 7 inspectors that were physically on the ground, that physically went to the location and reported back what they had found that Assad hadn't done that. But the actual official OPCW report at the end concluded that Assad had, and they all complained and said, hang on, that's not what we said. Our findings were A, B, C, and D, and they reported X, Y, and W. I mean, a completely different narrative. And many of them resigned as a result. I asked him why that wasn't reported, and his answer was very, very simple. Why would we want to help Assad? He's our enemy. So it wasn't about the truth. It wasn't about reporting objectively, saying what this is alleged to what happened. These are some of the things that may have happened around it, and allow the public to have a whole spectrum of information. There was one narrative, the government narrative, which was Assad was guilty. Assad did it, black and white. And if you question that, you were an Assad apologist. I called an Assad apologist. I don't care about Assad, but I do care about the truth. And it's the same thing.
It's ironic. We've actually had MIT professor Ted Postel on that put the science behind the alternative narrative, the one that actually existed on the ground, and we've given substantial coverage to that as well. And of course, I got no coverage. In fact, it got ridiculed and dismissed in the United States.
Of course. So your media is largely as compliant with the government as ours are. I mean, we'll see how it fares.
We'll see if it shifts now.
We'll see how it fares.
Let me jump back to the MP's comments there, because one of the other things he said, which is again part of this continued narrative, is that he believes that if sufficient amounts of stuff is given to the Ukraine side, then the Ukraine, quote, can't be bullied by Putin. So there's still this belief. And again, I agree with you. I think just looking at his facial expressions and the heart that he's speaking with, I think that he actually believes what he's saying, that gosh, if we just give enough stuff, they're going to change around. But the evidence on the ground screams the opposite, that it doesn't matter how much stuff you give. You could give all of the British Army equipment, all of it, lock, stock, and barrel.
It's depleted.
To them. Just theoretically, even if it's not depleted, it still won't matter because the manpower isn't there to use it. Does he not understand that?
No. As I said, he's either a liar or he's stupid. I don't believe he's lying. I believe he believes.
Okay, that's him. What about some of the others? Because I know you run in some circles where you talk to some British officials and members of the military. Okay. Do they recognize this, or do they also think this?
Well, it depends. So it depends on what rank you are. So I think when you start getting to sort of major generals and above, they become political or more political appointments. And I'm sure that's absolutely true in the US.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. So for example, last week, I won't mention his name, a major general met with Keir Starmer and briefed the Prime Minister on how we have to ramp up and triple the narrative of how Britain is preparing for war with Russia. So I beg the question, but Russia's not a direct threat to Great Britain, which is not. They're not going to attack us. And he agreed. He said, no, they're not going to attack us. However, they are very, very likely to attack Europe. Europe are our allies. And because we have, strategic partnerships and relationships with our European friends, we need to support them. And thus, by supporting them, we're defending and improving our own defenses, which makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense if what he is saying is true, but it's absolutely not true. So, for example, there's two main. When I say main, there's several, but there's two. The two major, and I've said this on your show before. There's two major weapons storage facilities in the UK. One in Bicester and another one in Telford. And not my words, the people that work there, depleted. So we've got this really strong rhetoric where the Prime Minister only a week ago is saying we need to prepare for war with Russia right now, and have done for quite some time. So if that's true, just imagine that is true for argument's sake. We're at an all-time low. To replenish all of the things that we should have is going to take years. So if that rhetoric has been true for that many years, why haven't we done it? So they don't believe it. They don't believe it. Otherwise, they would have done it, and they haven't.
Well, and in fact, to your point here, and Gary, this is a little out of order, so let's run this up here. But here is another British MP, MP Jenkins, who said that very thing verbatim on the floor of the Parliament.
We must be ready to fight a war with Russia if necessary in order to be able to deter Russia, and if we are to be in any position to guarantee the security of an independent and sovereign Ukraine after whatever is agreed between President Trump and President Putin.
Okay, now I don't have any access to what you were talking about there about depleted stocks, but I tell you what I do have access to, and I wonder if this fellow does as well. This is a comparison between Russia on this side and UK on this side. And you see in manpower, air power, land power, naval power, natural resources, financials, logistics, and geography, everything but geography goes to the Russian side here. And then when you spin down a little bit here, you see the manpower. Russia is up 72 million possibilities, available manpower, and actually fit for service is the biggest one. That's the number of people that are actually fit for military service. Russia has an advantage by 20 million people. And then the one that I really want to focus on here, you get down to the number of active duty forces, and UK is quite low. Sorry, here's this one right here, 180,000. Now that it doesn't sound like many in comparison to 1.3 million, but it gets worse because when you look at the number of actual ground troop fighters, the infantry, holy cow. The British Army number is 19,000. That's barely 4 or 5 battalions worth in the entire armed forces of Ukraine, of the UK. Now, with that understanding, why would you ever want to say, let's prepare for a war against the country that's by far the biggest in all of Europe at 1.3 million and growing, and it has combat experience that nobody in Britain has?
The problem is you are stating facts and dealing in facts. Over here in the UK, we're dealing in narratives. So the official narrative is that Russia's lost over 1 million people. They're struggling. Their economy's on the ground. If the number of headings in newspapers, I mean, it was just over a year ago or so, wasn't it, that Russia can't get chips, can't get computer chips. So they were buying up washing machines and old washing machines to steal the chips out of washing machines and put them in missiles because they're on the floor. They're depleted. They just
well yeah. I mean, it's
and people believe that.
A washing machine. Washing machine electronics can be changed over to be a missile. I mean, everybody knows that, but well, okay, that was an interesting story.
Yeah, it's been in the mainstream media. Been in the mainstream media here for ages.
Oh, wow.
And it's been repeated and repeated. So over here we have a narrative that Russia's on the floor. They're weak. They're begging for this war to stop because they're on their knees. Their economy's flatlining. The numerous YouTube experts talking about how Russia is that close. It's on the brink. And it just we don't deal in facts, we deal in narratives.
Well, unfortunately, I got it. We're guilty on that one just as much. And I'm talking about recently. We had, in fact, on yesterday's show, I think we showed General Jack Keane was saying the same thing. General Ben Hodges, literally, they're saying that Russia is just about a spent force. And I'm like, wow, what planet are you guys on? And what's the value of that? Because the information's factually inaccurate. Ergo, if you base your policies on that, you're going to base policies that won't succeed. That's the part that I don't understand. Even out of self-interest, at some point you got to say, well, that's just stupid, and we go down that path, it's going to harm us. Why are they not going down that path?
They don't, because as I said, we live off narratives, and the narratives work. So we've got the government narrative, you've got the mainstream media focusing stories around the narrative, and that culture.
That's one of your colleagues, Commodore Steve Jeremy.
Actually, he copies everything I say. That's not true. That's not true.
He says Britain bases its policies on narrative,
completely.
And Russia bases its policies on reality. And wow, that's and of course you got to extend that on this. Certainly, it has been to the United States. It appears that we've got some folks getting in power now who are going to go more to the reality side. But up to this point, ouch.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this previously on your show, but it's a really good example. So in June 2022, so a few years ago, Special Forces officer, who's a personal friend of mine, stays at my house. It's not somebody I met once or in passing, stays at my house, came back from Ukraine, and he just said, everything that you are told is a lie. Everything that you are told is a lie. And he just said they are being massacred. There's bodies everywhere. They can't get them in certain areas. They can't retrieve the bodies. That was in 2022. And he gave me lots and lots of different examples. And then I'd watch the news about how Russia's being smashed, being pushed back. I mean, last year, my favorite headline of all of this nonsense, all this propaganda, and it's so powerful. So the head of MI6, so the equivalent of your CIA, I guess, the head of MI6 did a press conference on Sky News, and he said Ukraine have taken back more land than Russia had gained since the invasion in 2022, and was now taking back more land and pushing Russia back. It's just a complete lie. So he's not stupid. He's not he's not stupid. He's just lying, and he's just filling that void. And I remember discussing it in my office here, and one of the girls in the office said, "What? So the guy from MI6, the head of MI6, you know more than him?" It's a knockout punch, Well, where'd you go with that? But I took that double punch on the chin because it was a killer knockout. Yeah. So you know more than the head of MI6. All right, okay, that makes perfect sense. It's a completely reasonable thing to say. It's completely reasonable.
It is, and the truth is, no, I don't. He definitely knows more than I do, which begs the question: why is he saying that? Because it is incongruent with the actual evidence. Ergo, it's untrue. So that's a good question. Now, let me show you some of the consequence of this. All of this narrative, whether it's been up to this point in the United States, all over Europe, etc., it has a very specific reaction. Here is somebody who should know better than all of us, Volodymyr Zelensky, on where he thinks now, in light of what Trump has said and what Vance has said, here's what he's saying we should do now.
Only our army in Europe has real modern battlefield experience. But our army alone is not enough too. And we need what you can provide: weapons, training, sanctions, financing, political pressure, and unity. 3 years of full-scale war have proven that we already have the foundation for a united European military force. And now, as we fight this war and lay the groundwork for peace and security, we must build the armed forces of Europe so that Europe's future depends only on Europeans, and decisions about Europe are made in Europe.
So a lot of smiling faces in that crowd, a lot of clapping there. But part of what he's saying may not be wrong. But you see, without question, he was referring to the United States. He's saying what happens in Europe should be only about Europe, as opposed to Trump coming in and saying, yeah, here's what we're going to do. And maybe they should start having their own national security. Let's look at that first. Do you think there's any move within Europe? And maybe this is going to be part of a tectonic shift that could come, that maybe now Europe is going to say, well, maybe we should handle our own security instead of relying on the U.S.
It's possible. Yeah, it's very, very possible. So I mean, NATO's NATO's an outdated model. It's simple as that. Did it serve a purpose in the Cold War? I'm not military. I think, based on the conversations that I've had with very senior NATO officials and guys at the MOD, I think the answer is yes.
I'm a full agreement in that.
No, I think yes. I mean, I supply them, as you know. So NATO,
fuel to run.
NATO bottle of gin. So they need to drink more of that, by the way. But yeah, I mean, it's just outdated. When Russia was the Soviet Union and there was the real threat of communism, but it's gone. That doesn't exist. We make it exist in our minds by creating narratives and stories about Soviet aggression. Sometimes the newspapers refer to the Russians as the Soviets. They're not the Soviets. But that's how propaganda works, and it works very, very well. That's all I can really say on that. But what was really interesting, what Zelensky just said. So the general that met with Keir Starmer last week, they were talking about the potential negotiations with Putin, and what Britain wants. Britain wants two things. Britain wants Putin to face trial for war crimes and crimes against humanity and all this kind of stuff. And we're going to stand really strong on that because British values, we care so much. We don't give a monkey's about the million kids that have died over in Ukraine. We'll send more and more of those kids to their deaths. If we had the weapons, which we don't, if we had the weapons, we would gladly sacrifice their kids. You don't see British kids coming home in bags, European kids coming home in body bags, but it's their kids, so we don't care. And then we spin this narrative: if they don't die, it's us next, and all this. Just not true. It's complete lies. So that was the first thing. We want Putin in a criminal court for war crimes, and this is just, I don't know, Alice in Wonderland politics, I guess, is that we believe. What Britain's going to try and I mean, we've got no influence. We haven't. Ian Proud's former senior diplomat in Moscow has got more experience than anybody on this. We haven't even talked to Russia for years. Britain gets all of its information on the Kremlin and Moscow or Russia, whatever you want to call it, from Germany and France. We can't speak to them direct because it's just insane, absolutely insane. So we get our information secondhand from other governments. That's not looking after the British interest. Winston Churchill said, "Jaw is better than war. Talk. Even if I don't like you, Danny, we've got all these disputes. I think you're terrible. We need to talk." I had lunch years ago, and I was talking to David Mellor, who was a former cabinet minister in Margaret Thatcher's government, and he was talking about how to go to East Germany, the communist bloc, and Erich Honecker ran it, and he ran it with ruthless efficiency. And he was saying we didn't like him, but we had to do business with him, and we had to go and speak to him, we had to talk to him, we had to do things. And that's what diplomacy is all about. And I think in Ian Proud's book, at the beginning of his book, he says that when you walk into the Foreign Office, there's a big sort of sign on the wall, and it says, with the best foreign service on the world, we talk to everyone, and we do this and we do that. And we don't. That may have been true. And I last June, I went to I met up with Margaret Thatcher's private secretary, Sir John. Oh, his name's just gone. I'm getting old. You see all the grey hair? It's definitely going. I met up with him, and I was saying to him about all the stuff with Russia at the moment. And he was the head once Margaret Thatcher had gone, he was no longer her private secretary. He ran the Foreign Office, the Foreign Service. And he said, no, we talk to everyone, which is really refreshing. And I told him that we don't have diplomacy with Russia. He didn't believe me, which was quite refreshing because it shows that we did try and talk, which is the most important thing. But we don't do that anymore. So, we're a second-rate player. Like I've said it before, we're like Scrappy-Doo. You've got Scooby-Doo, and you've got the little pup who wants to fight everyone, is really tough and is fearless, but he's not really. But he talks tough. That's us. We talk a good game, but we're not in the game. We're
And
not
you know
engaged.
that's why the other thing that Europe's heads exploded about was when Trump talked to Putin openly, and
Good,
and didn't even blink about it. Of course,
good.
the previous administration bragged about not talking to Russia at
Pathetic,
any point, et cetera.
pathetic.
But I got to say, we got to take a ding too. You talk about supporting Ukraine, and no matter how many kids die, here's what an American politician said about that just a couple of days ago.
I want to tell you and your people, you're the ally I've been hoping for all my life. Not one American has died defending Ukraine. You've taken our weapons and you've kicked their ass. And I'm very proud to have you as our ally.
That's hard for me to show. It's embarrassing, humiliating to have him bragging on stage.
I'm glad he's on your side.
It's right in line with what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean he's nuts, isn't he? He's just nuts. But that's not true. American soldiers have died, as have British soldiers. It's all classified. But American soldiers have died. British soldiers have died. But he's just a warmonger, isn't he? I mean, he just there's no war that he doesn't love, if that makes sense.
Yeah, unfortunately, it does.
But going back to what I was going to say about Zelensky and the British, I digress. Sorry, and start talking about the Foreign Service. So back to our negotiating position. So Putin needs to go into an international tribunal court for war crimes and all this kind of stuff, and also Britain is going to stand strong and try and enforce. We've got no power whatsoever, which just makes it so ridiculous that we, the Brits, are prepared to allow the Russians to take the Donbass, but we're not going to allow them to take Crimea. And I think Sevastopol.
Wait.
It's Alice in Wonderland.
Allow them to take.
Allow them, yeah, because we're going to stand, with our firm negotiation. We haven't spoken to them for years, and then we're going to get involved in a negotiation and come from a position of strength, which is complete nonsense. It's Alice in Wonderland politics. But they're the briefings around Keir Starmer, and that was a week ago. So I'm just, we started off this conversation about the shift from Biden to Trump. It's just 180 degrees, completely different. Well, we're still over there with Biden and Alice in Wonderland politics. Stupid.
That's stupid. That's just almost that.
Unbelievable.
I can hardly believe that, even in this current environment. Does someone actually think that they had where does the wherewithal come from to compel? You have to not allow, you have to compel Russia to do anything. And I don't see any of that on there. Now, unfortunately, I got to say, we're going to go back to Zelensky. He may be feeding that narrative as well. Here's one of the other things he said, kind of an interesting way of phrasing stuff. He says he thinks the most influential member in all of NATO is Vladimir Putin.
I also will not take NATO membership for Ukraine off the table. But right now, the most influential member of NATO seems to be Putin. Because his whims have the power to block NATO decisions. And that's despite the fact that it was Ukraine's army that stopped Russia, not a NATO country, not NATO troops, but only our people and our army.
Okay, yeah, I get it that you're the only army that's been fighting so far. But, I found it interesting and troubling that when he said that, even despite what the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, said a couple of days ago when he first got to Europe, that their NATO is just unrealistic. It's not going to be part of any negotiated settlement. Now here you have Zelensky on the stage right after the vice president's gone, still saying we are going to get into NATO.
Never.
And there's a big applause line.
It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. I'll give you an example. So if we go back to when Finland and Sweden were being admitted into NATO in 2022. I was at a NATO event later in the year. I was at some events earlier in the year, and the Swedes and the Finns were already there, and I got to meet the various dignitaries, we'll call them, from Finland and Sweden. And so later in the year, obviously I won't mention names, but I met somebody and had a one-to-one over a gin and tonic. Someone very senior from the British side. And I said to him, out of interest, obviously at that particular time earlier in the year, Turkey was sort of potentially blocking Sweden's access into NATO because of issues, political issues with people in Sweden and all this kind of thing, different groups that he didn't agree with. I said, could Turkey, and I said to him, forgive my ignorance, but could Turkey be kicked out of NATO for not being compliant and trying to block the Swedes, who obviously did get into NATO? He went, oh, no. It's a very uneasy alliance. You've got all these different countries with all their different internal objectives and things that they want for themselves. It's a very uneasy alliance. And I'm on social media looking at all the NATO platitudes, showing two hands going stronger together, united and all that. And he was telling me the reality. And the reality is the reality. You get a load of people with different objectives and put them in a room, there's going to be disagreements. It's just human nature. There's nothing unusual with that. But obviously they're projecting the power and the strength. And I said to him, do you think Ukraine, so the MOD in London, the senior bods there didn't ever think NATO, that Ukraine would ever get into NATO. They just said there'll be World War III if that happens, which is true. And I asked him, do you think Ukraine will get? Oh no, he goes, I wouldn't have thought so. And there you go. But all Blinken and Blinken, we're building a pathway, supersession. We're creating an accelerated path, and all these different wonderful expressions about getting Ukraine into NATO fast. And if they were Sweden,
it's inevitable, and
that
they said in last summer's Washington summit, et cetera. And it doesn't matter. I mean, you could just say, look, Fico from Slovakia, Viktor Orban from Hungary definitely wouldn't. But now then you see there is no way on God's earth that Trump would ever even allow them into NATO. So pretty much that says it's a zero chance, because all members have to vote to have somebody come in here. But here's the problem. Here's a question I got for you. And then I got one last thing to discuss. Why would so many in Europe, and you saw some of those crowd shots, they're like high-ranking generals and stuff from all the different countries, applaud when he says we're still going to be in NATO? Why would any of them want such a volatile person in NATO that would almost certainly spark World War III?
Because they support the narrative that it's an unprovoked war. Putin woke up one morning.
Okay, but I mean, narrative aside, but I mean, surely,
but the narrative wins.
The narrative would translate into actual bombs falling on my head.
Yeah, but the narrative wins. If we don't support Ukraine now, you're next. Not you personally, not America, but here in Europe, Poland's next, Slovakia's next, Finland's next. Finland, I was at Finland at Christmas. You just go in the mainstream media and they're on a war footing. Russia. I mean, a guy was talking to me. He said, those boats that come into the UK from France, Calais, with all the illegals that come in every single day? I said, yeah, no, I know about that. And he said, do you know Putin's behind that? I went, you're joking. And he said, yeah, no, we had a big exposure here in Finland showing how Putin, not Putin personally, but the Russian state was behind that. And it's just complete nonsense. But it's that brainwashing, it's that culture. And if you're on a war footing and you don't have any counter narrative, there's no checks and balances. That's the problem. It's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Well, this, I guess, just to put a capper on this, the first video I showed you was the vice president of the most powerful country on the planet gave what he thought was going to be an applause line, and those people, a handful of them. And it's funny because he joked earlier when he actually made it at the very beginning and did get some minor applause. He says, well, I hope that's not my only applause line, but as it turned out, it nearly was, because some of the others were even less. No one even clapped at all. That's in contrast to this guy at the end of his speech. We've shown Zelensky. Absolute standing ovation. I think this is, if we went on all of it, it was like 30 seconds, just nonstop, just people clapping. And this is maybe the most condemning thing for Europe, in my view, because anyone with any kind of rational understanding would be able to see that Zelensky is totally divorced from reality, worse than anybody else, because his is not a narrative. His people are actually dying, and yet
He doesn't
all
care.
of Europe cheering behind it.
It's disgusting. I mean, I have no words. It's absolutely disgusting. But they're all, yeah, I mean, America is NATO. I mean, NATO is America. We all join the club, but, it's American soft power. It's, without America, it will collapse. I asked one of your other guests, I won't say who, but I asked one of your other guests 6 months ago if Trump gets in, will he stop NATO? Will he stop contributing to NATO? Oh no, definitely not. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, Trump's got bigger fish to fry, hasn't he? Than trying to save all that lot clapping.
I think what Trump, from some folks I've talked to that are in his orbit, say he doesn't want to get out of NATO, at least not right now, but he wants to take a definite shift to where the U.S. is like the backstop of Europe and no longer on the front line, and that Europe needs to step up and take its front line. Now, if Europe doesn't do that, then his calculus could change and he could go in a different direction that's even less appealing for many Europeans, but we'll see how that pans out. Listen, have really enjoyed having you on today. You've been some tremendous insight into some of these things that a lot of our American audiences just wouldn't have without the smartest man in London. So we appreciate that. But I don't want to let you go, because I understand that there's people can see over your shoulder there. There's the phone box, a British phone box, and as I understand,
can you see the spies? If I try and hold up my, can you see all the spies around?
The guy in the black and white.
Yeah, so I run a plumbing company. I run a plumbing company, and obviously we make gin and rum and whiskey and all that kind of stuff. And we've got we've got brilliant, cool customers like Buckingham Palace, the House of Lords, obviously NATO, Ministry of Defence, and that's obviously on the gin stuff. But so Banksy is a really, really famous street artist. So I don't know if you want to hear all this. I'll make it very brief.
Sure.
So if you think about all of the big auction houses in London, in New York, for example, if they're going to sell a Banksy for, tens of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of pounds, if not millions, how do they know that Banksy is a real Banksy and not a fake Banksy? Because obviously if they sell a fake, their reputation's down the drain. So there is actually a genuine authentication process for Banksies. And just by coincidence, and I promise you it's coincidence, we had done plumbing work, just tiny little jobs, fixing a leaking toilet and all this kind of stuff over the years, for his company. Obviously, he's not named on the company. His friends run it for him. And then we got a call one day, unbeknown, we didn't know anything about Banksy and all this kind of stuff. We got a call saying, can you fit a boiler for us this evening? Now, a boiler is a big ticket item. It's thousands of pounds. Customers get a quote. They want to discuss the quote. They want to discuss the detail. What kind of model boiler? Is it big enough for my property? Will it do this? Will it do that? There's all these kind of technical questions that happen. We just get a call saying, oh, can you fit a boiler for us this evening? Well, you fit a boiler at 8 o'clock in the morning and it takes all day. You don't start at night and work into the night, because that's just doesn't work like that. And if you need some bits, everything's closed, so the job's not going to be done. So it was a recipe. So we were really suspicious, thinking, "Oh, this doesn't make sense. This is very odd." And we were saying, "Well, can we send an engineer over? We send an engineer that's free of charge. We'll have a look. And we can give you a quote." No. Just got to turn up. Well, what boiler do you want? Oh, I don't know. Is it this kind of boiler, this kind of boiler, this kind of system? Oh, I don't know. Bring everything. No. It doesn't work like that. We turn up with an Arctic lorry, if you follow that logic. And eventually we got a picture through about 4:30. We close at 5, and just 1,000,000 to 1 chance the gods were with us. The boiler that they had that had broken and needed to be replaced, we had 2 of them in the office, the same model. So it was a really easy change, because you'd have to adjust any of the pipe work and the plumbing, because the plumbing's done. So we sent them a quote, and we had to be there so that the people were out. And one of our senior engineer at the time was a guy called Bear, big guy. We called him Grizzly Bear because he had a big beard. So Bear gives me a call about 8 o'clock in the evening and says, "Oh, you never guess who I'm working for?" So we didn't know. We were really suspicious, because it was all really odd. No one fits boilers at night. And he said, "Elton John." I went, "You're joking." He said, No, you should see the place. It's full of art. So I went over there. Obviously, it's my company. So anyway, the person comes in, and I said, I'm such an idiot. I feel stupid saying this. I said, is this Elton John's flat? It was a flat. It wasn't even a big mansion or anything. It was a flat. Big house converted into flats. I said, this is Elton John's house. And he said, no, what makes you say that? I said, just repeating what Bear had said to me. And there was nothing musical about the place whatsoever. There was just tons of art. And I don't mean just on the walls. There was stacks and stacks of pictures and paintings all wrapped up. You couldn't move with a little pathway. It was like a store, really. I didn't think people were really living there. And it turned out to be Banksy. So we did a deal in the end, and I got a piece of art and obviously an authentic. It's called a pest control certificate. And what they do is they give you a certificate, and what they do is they have a £10 note, and obviously on the old £10 notes was the Queen, but they had Princess Diana's face on it, imprinted on it, and they ripped the note in half. There's two certificates. They keep one certificate with one half of the note, you have the other, and then when you come to sell it, they match them up, and if it's authenticated, then it can be passed on if you're selling it to the new owner, etc. And that's how the process works. So that was my connection to Banksy, and then I became friends with his crew. I'm not going to say any more than that. I'll send you some pictures privately of my little boy with them and stuff.
Great.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool. It's really cool. And they trust me, and I don't blab really, because it's a really cool story. It's a fun story.
It is, yeah, and I like to hear stuff like that, so that everything isn't gloom and doom all the time. But anyway, I would love to have you on today. So it's brilliant, some great insights, and we'll always look forward to having you back very soon.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you very much indeed.
Right. Thank you very much. And we appreciate you guys too. Be sure and like and subscribe. If you haven't, that does us a lot more good than you may think. It helps us spread the word so that other people find out what you already know, that we are unintimidated and uncompromised to tell you the truth, no matter what it is. Thank you very much. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.